little bit more similarly to beer than anything else. A lot of people call sake rice wine, and it makes sense that people do. It's just a slight misnomer in that, like, sake is higher alcohol. It is complex, so you sip it more like a wine. It has some aroma. And so people relate it to that kind of wine experience and how they kind of experience sake. But the way that it's made is actually more like a beer, and it's brewed. It's not distilled at all. So a lot of people have this idea that sake is a liquor, but it's not. There's no distillation process, but it does have high alcohol content. So that's also, I think, where people get a little bit confused, is they think that, oh, this is very high in alcohol. It usually ranges in the 15 to 18% range, which is a little bit higher than wine, slightly higher than wine, but it's definitely not on the level of like a shot of vodka or anything like that. And then just a couple other things is that it's gluten-free naturally. It's low in carbohydrates, and it's low in sugar compared to white wine. So I think that just to kind of get a sense of some of those kind of characteristics of sake are important. So you might be wondering, I'm gonna skip this one because we'll come back to that. About my journey. So I got the opportunity to go to Japan I guess it was about 10 years ago at this point. And when I went, I got to have fantastic sake for the first time. And it totally kind of like broke the levee for me. It was an incredible experience where I got to sit down and try a whole lot of different sakes from different regions and from different breweries, and try different styles. And it really just opened my eyes to that. Like, I think a lot of times people think sake is kind of one thing. And the reality is that it's a craft beverage that has a lot of different nuance to it. And so I came back to the US and I started drinking a lot more sake. And the more I drank it, the more I kind of fell deeper in love with it. And then one fateful night, I was maybe drinking too much sake. And I had done a lot of homebrew of beer in the past. And so I thought, oh, I wonder how you make this. And so I started to do some research, and I looked a little bit deeper. And I made my first batch at home and was completely enthralled by the process. And we'll get a little bit deeper into how it's made a little bit further on. But I made my first batch and it turned out pretty good. And then the second batch and the third batch, and then all of a sudden my whole basement has been converted into a small sake brewery. And my wife is going, "What are you doing?" And then I kind of looked at it a little bit deeper and got to do some of the bigger steps. So I got to go back to Japan. I got to study under a 6th generation sake brewer out there. I got to travel around the US to meet some of the other American sake brewers, and then eventually open up our shop here in Charlottesville, like I said, in 2018. And so, our place is pretty special. We have the brewery as well as a tasting room where you can have really delicious Japanese cuisine. You can get a flight of our sake. You can get bottles. You can get a brewery tour. And really kind of dive into, what sake is all about. So what I'm going to do, like I said, this presentation is a little out of whack. We'll start here. We'll get to the actual sake drinking, which I think everybody's here for, right? So we'll start with our real magic. So a lot of you guys came and picked up your sake tasting kit. This is our real magic. So this is what I consider like a fantastic table sake. It's like right in the middle. And when people talk about sake, they usually are talking about a few attributes. One, they'll talk about clarity. So this is what's considered a clear sake, which just means there's no haze. We'll talk about that in the future and you'll get to try a cloudy style sake in just a second. But this is a junmai. So what that means is that the rice has been milled to a certain percentage And this is like I said, a great just middle of the road table sake in that it has a little bit of sweetness, but it's not too sweet. It's got some dry aftertaste. It's got some really wonderful flavors of apple and pear, and then has a nice earthy finish. So there's kind of this triangulation you do with sake, which is, you know, sweet to dry kind of scale, and then kind of fruity to earthy. And this one, like I said, lands kind of right in the middle. And so, before, you know, I guess hopefully you guys have drank some, but maybe we can all lift our glasses really quick. So in Japanese, to say cheers, it's the word kanpai. It means turn your glass over. So kanpai to all of you.
Kanpai.
So I mentioned this a second ago around this term junmai. So junmai means two things. It actually means pure rice is the first kind of definition of it. And so if you're familiar with beer, you know, like in Germany, they have kind of these beer laws where you can only make beer from a few things. And so it's kind of the same thing. And so junmai means pure rice, and that means we're only using rice to make all of the flavors that are in the sake itself. The second thing that you talk about with the word junmai is a milling rate. And you can see on the screen, it says single milled. And so milling in sake is very important. So you think about a grain of rice, and usually you're thinking about like an oval shape. But good sake rice has what this starch core that lives in the center of the rice. And good starch content will give you more aromatic and fruity and really nicely flavored sake. So what they'll do, or what we do, is we mill away the outside of the rice to get to a more pure starch center. And so there's a bunch of different mill rates that a lot of different breweries play with as they're brewing their sake. So you could have a sake that is more like a junmai, which means it's milled to around 70%. So 70% of the rice remains, 30% of the rice gets taken away. So you kind of start to get these little pearls. And then there are classifications from junmai to more refined ones, like you'll taste towards the end, which is our Serenity Now, where the mill rate gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you're kind of getting closer and closer to a really, really pure starch content. So when you hear people talking about milling rates with sake, that's what they're talking about. Let's see here. Okay. So as we're sipping this a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about the history of sake. So most people kind of know that, like, Japan, this is Japan's national beverage. They take a lot of pride in it. And it's usually served during formal ceremonies, weddings, special events, and holidays. Sake is really deeply entwined with the seasons and the rice harvest, and what is called a brewing season. So you got to think way back, you know, sake is almost 3,000 years old. And so, you know, sake is tied to these seasons very deeply in that, you know, in the warm months, you are planting and growing rice. In the fall, you're harvesting. And then in the winter, you're brewing sake. And they have something called a brewing season in Japan that's tied to the winter. So from around October 1st through the middle of March, they usually brew the entire season's worth of sake during the winter. And the reason for that is that's the only time of year you can get your tanks super, super cold. And sake is naturally brewed at a very cold temperature. So the original cold brew, you might say. And so, you know, in Japan, there's all these things that are tied to the brewing season. But if you think about the history, so a lot of people, I think in a lot of Asian cultures, there are a lot of different rice-based alcohol. But Japan really took this to the next level. And throughout the Nara period is when sake really started to come into its own. And, throughout that kind of period, it was mostly being brewed in Shinto shrines. So, I think like most alcohol kind of starts in the shrines and in Buddhist temples, something that was specially made just to appease the gods. But, by the 16th centuries, breweries began to establish and sake started to become drank more by the masses, kind of starting at the emperor kind of level and the noble kind of people, and then eventually kind of coming down to the masses. In the Edo period, the techniques really started to change. So around 1600s, sake become less sweet and have more lighter flavors, and new filtration methods started to come around. And then around the 1800s is when sake started to really branch out from Japan. And in this period, there were over 27,000 breweries in Japan. If you think about the size of Japan and the fact that they had 27,000 breweries, I think it's pretty amazing. And it's kind of, I think, along the lines of what we're seeing in the craft beer world right now, where kind of every neighborhood has their local sake brewery. In Japan, I think it's very similar in that you've got something called jizake, which is local sake, and people have a lot of pride in their local sake brewery. And so, it's not rare for you to go to a town and for them to have 2 or 3 sake breweries kind of there. But then the World Wars came, and this really affected the sake industry, and it kind of collapsed the industry because basically rice became very sacred or needed for eating, and so a lot of kind of corners were cut, and really cheaply made sake kind of came to the market. So that they could conserve more of the rice for eating, and it caused the whole industry to kind of collapse on itself. But after that, there was something called the Ginjo boom in the 1970s, and this is when sake really kind of started to come up again. Really light flavors of sake started to come to prominence, and has kind of led to a lot of the more modern styles that we enjoy today. And so sake right now is starting to have a really large resurgence here in the US, with new sake breweries popping up and more sake coming in from Japan. Like I said, we're the first in Virginia, and there's probably about 15 in the entire country right now, with, I would guess, maybe 5 or 6 in the works and even more in planning. So it's a really interesting time for sake in the US. So that's just a little bit of history. And we are going to jump now to our second sake. So this is our big baby. And so what I want you guys to do before you pour this one is give it a little shake. A little shake. So this is a cloudy version of our sake. And we'll talk about what that means here in just a second. So go ahead and pour this one. And you'll notice that it has kind of a white tint to it. And all that is rice. So a cloudy style of sake, you got to think like a hazy IPA or something like that. And that it's a decision that a brewer makes to keep in a certain amount of the rice without filtering it out. And what that can do is it changes the texture of the sake a bit. It changes the flavor profile. And so you can get a lot bigger banana notes to it. This is actually quite a light style of cloudy sake. Sometimes they can be a lot thicker. And so it's just kind of a different preference on what you might like. Sometimes these sakes can be a lot sweeter as well. We don't make ours particularly sweet. I think we tend in general to have more dry styles of sake. And that's more of a personal preference of mine as the brewer. So I like drier styles better. But what's really neat is when you try this one is to actually taste it side by side with the real magic. And so these two are actually from the exact same batch. It's just that one's been further clarified and one we've left the particles in. And so what that'll do is kind of give you an idea of what it means to leave the different amounts of rice in the drink.
Hey, Andrew, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
It's Eddie. 2 questions. Can you talk about cold sake versus warm sake?
Sure.
And then also, do you find aged sake, and how does that taste compared to young sake?
Yeah. So the question of cold and hot sake is a big one. And I think that it's one of those things where I think that in general, it feels like a lot of people in the US have only had warm sake before. And so it's one of those things where I would say and encourage people to drink it, try it cold, because it might give you a different perception of what sake is. But at the same time, warmed sake is a real delight and can be really delicious, especially in the cold months. So it's one of those things that I think it's a lot more seasonally driven than people realize. And because, you know, it's like one of those things, like on a really cold winter's day, getting a nice warm glass of sake can warm your body and feel really nice, and it can be delicious. And so, but I think also having that crisp, cold experience of a sake is just a fantastic way to experience it. And a lot of people, you know, you can play with temperature as well. And so what I'll do a lot of times is I'll take a bottle of sake, I take it out of the fridge and I'll pour my first glass, and it'll be chilled and cold. But then I'll usually just leave the bottle out on the counter and kind of let it come to room temperature and try it as it's kind of warmed up a bit. And so that's a fun way to kind of see how taste can evolve as the temperature changes. So yeah, there's no necessarily right or wrong way in terms of hot versus cold. It's just more that sake is flexible and you can have fun playing with the different temperatures. And then in terms of aging is a really great question, because it's a really controversial point in the world of sake. And I would say that in general, most sakes are not aged. There's usually a maturation period of a few months to kind of help the sake round out after it's done its fermentation. But in general, you want to try to drink sake as fresh as possible. But there are aged sakes that exist out there. And they're unique and they're funky and they're strange. And I think that that's kind of, it's like that warning, like, yeah, you know, they're different. And if you want to try something different, you should go for it. And there could be really fantastic aged sakes. Like it brings a lot more caramel notes, kind of a funk with the age to it. But it's fun to explore. And I think that's kind of thing about sake is that there's not necessarily a lot of right or wrong. A lot of people think that's true, but in reality, it's more about what do you like? What are you in the mood for? What's the season? What can you get your hands on? And so, you know, I have a lot of people, you know, I think aging is also a tough one too, because a lot of times sake is mishandled, which I'll talk a little bit about. And then, you know, if it's mishandled and it's old, then it's probably going to have a bad taste. Nothing's going to hurt you, but it's probably not going to taste great. But if a sake has been properly aged, it can have really interesting character to it. And so back to that idea of like a freshness around sake. So people talk a lot about freshness with sake. You know, you want, if possible, to, as soon as you get your sake, to put it in your fridge. You want to try to keep it cold. You keep it cold, it'll stay longer. And in general, it has a robustness to it. Like if you keep it in your fridge, it can stay good for, you know, up to 2 years. So that's kind of one thing that I think a lot of people get confused on. And then even after you open it, it's not like a wine where you'll open your sake and maybe like 2 days later, it's totally, no, it actually has some legs to it. And that, you know, if you open it up, but you cap it back and you put it in your fridge, it can be good for 2-3 weeks after that as well. Maybe even longer. It's not going to just kind of turn overnight. But I think, you know, with misnomers of people thinking it's liquor, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to somebody's house and they'll pull a bottle of sake off their liquor shelf that might have been there for like a couple years. And you're like, well, it's not liquor. It's more of a fresh kind of thing. Like you wouldn't do that with a beer. And that's kind of why we say like it is made more like a beer. So you gotta kind of treat it a little bit differently. So hopefully that answers your question. Great. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to something a little different. So what we've done so far, we've gotten to talk about kind of what a classic table sake might taste like, right in the middle, not too sweet, not too dry. We talked a little bit about cloudiness and how that can add to your experience. We're going to head to a very unique territory now, which is our extra dry Karakuchi Genshu. So this one sits on a very far side of the spectrum. This is our extra dry sake. So this one is going to have big earthy flavor. This one has higher alcohol content. So you'll see it says Karakuchi Genshu. So Karakuchi means dry in Japanese, but actually has kind of this connotation to it of like a little bit of spice. And then Genshu means extra strength. So Genshu means high alcohol. This one is 18% alcohol. And so what we've done is let this ferment cold for a little longer to really boost the alcohol content up and at the same time dry it out. And so you'll get a lot more cedar notes to it, some big kind of mushroomy kind of flavor, kind of a big umami bomb. And so we have people who come to the brewery and this is all they want to drink. And then we have people who try it and go, not for me. And that's totally fine. But yeah, this sits on this kind of one side of the spectrum. And I think that a lot of whiskey drinkers tend to really appreciate kind of the alcohol character of this one. And so, you know, this is a higher end kind of alcohol sake. So we're going to jump back here a little bit. We're going to talk about how it's made. So we talked about rice, and you can see in this picture, actually, that is what milled rice looks like these little pearls. The other ingredients are water, which I think we all know what that is, yeast, and koji. So koji is really what gives sake its unique character. So koji is actually a mold, but think friendly mold like cheese. It is, and what it does is as it grows, it makes all these enzymes that turn starch into sugar. So we talked a lot about starch before around the milling. But these enzymes are incredible things that turn starch into sugar. Without these enzymes, we wouldn't have any alcohol at all. You have to have sugar to make sake. So what we do is we take steamed rice. So this is me steaming some rice. And then we bring it into a very special room. This is our koji room. And I will incubate the rice with the koji on it and let it grow for around 2 days in a hot and humid environment. And so for 2 days it's growing, and I really have to take care of it. I have to really pay attention to it. And I spend a lot of time mixing the rice. I spend a lot of time separating it into different containers, monitoring the heat, monitoring the humidity, so that it grows on just the right scale. And the kind of results of that are kind of a sweet chestnutty result with, it's kind of this amazing aroma and amazing taste. I kind of say it kind of smells like frosted flakes mixed with some tropical notes of like pineapple, mango, cherry. It's really one of the more unique things. And, you know, I spent a lot of time in this room, and a lot of brewers consider the koji room kind of the heart of a sake brewery. It's where a lot of the character comes out of sake. And so I spend a lot of time in there making sure that everything comes together just right. So we'll take steamed rice, we'll take the koji, we'll take water, and we'll take yeast, and we'll put them all into our tanks to cold ferment for around 30 days. Now, this is also something that makes sake extremely unique in that there's something happening here called multiple parallel fermentation. So you think about grape wine. So you take grapes, you squeeze them, and you've got juice, and your juice has sugar already in it. So all you got to do is add the yeast, and boom, you've got wine. But for us, we've got rice. We've got steamed rice. There's no sugar in it. So we'll take the rice and the koji and the water and the yeast, and we'll put them all in the tank together. And over the course of that 30 days, the koji is slowly breaking down all of those yeast or all of those rice grains and turning them into sugar. And at the same time, the yeast is eating up that sugar and making alcohol. So there's no other alcohol that does it in that way. And so it's a slow process, and really it's a lot about aligning these two microorganisms so that they are in harmony with each other. It's about slowing the yeast and the fermentation down to give koji time to work. And then as the koji is breaking down, the yeast are getting fed and creating wonderful alcohols and putting off great aromas and taste. And so, yeah, it's a lot of work to try to make sure that that fermentation is happening just right. Our tanks are open top tanks, so we actually stir our sake daily because it's a thicker mash. And then once the sake is done fermenting, we do different levels of pressing, which remove the solids and leave us with sake. And that's where we do different levels of filtration, whether it's to give you a clear sake or a cloudy sake. It just kind of depends on what we're doing. And then we bottle everything by hand here at our brewery. So we make it all happen here in Virginia, which is pretty wild. Okay. Now we're on to our Serenity Now. I gotta finish my glass here. Okay, so Serenity Now is a Junmai Daiginjo grade of sake, or a highly milled rice. So this is the highest level of classification for sake. So it just means ultra premium. And it means that the rice has been milled down to a further degree. So this one has been milled down to about 50%. So half of that rice grain we've gotten rid of and half of it remains. And what that does is it gives you that more refined starch content and gives you fruitier flavors, smoother finish, and kind of a nice aroma to it. And we're really proud of how this one turned out. We won a bronze medal for this at the Sake World Tasting Challenge. And so this one, you know, comparatively to that Quiet Giant that we just drank, is a little bit on the sweeter side. But like I said, just has a really wonderful finish and a lot of fruity notes, a little bit of lychee. Some say a little bit of tangerine kind of notes come out of this one as well.
Andrew, I was serious in my little chat box there. Didn't you hear from George Costanza about Serenity Now?
Oh, I can't see that. Sorry, because I think I'm sharing my screen. But we did, yeah. So that's actually a really funny story. I mean, we're big Seinfeld fans here. And, you know, we were thinking about what we were going to name this one. And a lot of sakes tend to be named, you know, kind of more traditional things like, you know, Beautiful Lotus Flower, or like, you know, Wandering Poet and things like this. And so kind of thinking in Serenity, like something serene. And then it was like Serenity Now. I was like, perfect. And so, yeah, that's a reference to Seinfeld. And so we actually, we made this, and I had a good friend of mine who was like, he was like, oh, this is awesome. And he just took a photo of it, and he went on Twitter and he said, you know, at Jason Alexander, you know, you got to check this out. And he wrote back and he said, it's a Festivus miracle, which was just hilarious. And so we sent him some sake. He got it. He never replied to us after that. But, you know, I think that's still pretty cool. So yeah. Awesome. So as we're kind of sipping on these things, let's talk a little bit about some of the, I guess, customs or things to kind of play with around sake. So we talked a little bit about hot and cold, which is always, you know, something fun to play with. But a lot of people, like I said, they kind of think there are all these traditions around sake, and there are, but they're not hard and fast, and you don't have to worry about doing something wrong when you're drinking sake. Sake is a very casual drink. It's something to be enjoyed with your friends. And so I think that that's a really fun thing to kind of talk about, which is like, it's a drink that's made for sharing. And so a big thing around sake is sharing. So what you want to do is, when you are drinking sake with your friends, you want to make sure that their glass is always full. So if you look over and you see your friend's glass is empty, it is very common to pick up that bottle and just fill it up for them. And it kind of shows an amount of generosity. It shows an amount of friendship and a certain comfortable level that you have with them, to just keep their glass full. And so, you know, a lot of people talk about glassware, which I think we'll talk a little bit about, but like, that's also why sake is usually drank out of very small cups. Not because it's necessarily supposed to be drank like a shot. I think a lot of people think it, you know, a little glass, boom, shoot it back. It's more about this idea that if you have a smaller glass, you have more opportunities to fill someone else's cup. So if it's small, you can drink it and then you have an empty cup and someone can fill it up for you. So more opportunities to kind of show generosity and show community. But yeah, more about glassware. There's a lot of glassware around sake, and in general, there actually isn't an official, you know, glass or way to drink sake. You know, you'll see like a lot of these porcelain kind of carafes, and those are usually used to help heat sake. But again, that's not how you necessarily have to drink sake. You can see the glasses that we use here at the brewery are kind of like casual cups. You can have really ornate, beautiful, you know, maybe like hand crafted pottery, or you could have just something fun and funky that you like and you just like to drink out of. Like at home, I've got this little porcelain cup that I got in Tokyo that's got these sumo wrestlers dancing, and it just is awesome and I love it. And so I drink sake out of it all the time. And so that's what I would encourage you to do, is like, you know, don't worry too much about what vessel you're drinking it out of, as long as you like the vessel and you think it's neat. It's a fine way to drink sake. I just lost my train of thought about other things around sake. We talked about kanpai. So kanpai, it just means bottoms up. It means turn your glass upside down. So when you are out drinking sake with your friends, it's great to say kanpai, and you know, clink your glasses together. Are there any other, I guess, questions around sake? I'm kind of drawing a blank onto this part of the presentation.
Hey, Andrew, it's
Yeah.
Eddie again. So as you might know, I'm a big whiskey and Scotch fan, and I'm always, you know, smelling and nosing it. Would that be similar with sake as well? Because you did talk about all the subtle flavors, the banana, nosing, the pear, the apple.
Yeah, so you know, aroma is a part of sake. I would say it's probably a little bit different in that it's fleeting, and that a lot of sake brewers, when you can get really good aroma, it's a kind of a point of pride. And so, yeah, you're not going to get like a super strong aroma necessarily off of any of them, but it is there. And it's something I think you should look for. And when you find it, sometimes it can be quite divine. You're just like, ooh, yeah. But there's all kinds of different aromas that can come from different sake. So I do, when I open up a new bottle, I do tend to smell it and kind of bring it in that way. So yes, you should definitely do that.
Yeah, I mean the Quiet Giant compared to the Serenity Now is completely different on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost like a you know, a peaty Scotch and a bourbon. I mean, it's very, very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. Yeah, and it's fun to kind of bounce back and forth and to kind of sense those differences out. I mean, that's what we really want people to do when they come to the brewery, when they try our sakes, is to start to get a picture of like, what am I tasting and what are the sides of this thing. And so, yeah, we kind of make our sakes to be a little bit on these edges so that people can kind of start to feel that out and say, oh, you know what, I think I like drier, like earthier sakes, or, oh, you know, I really like the lighter, sweeter styles. And that gives you kind of an idea of what to look for when you're out in the wild, just kind of picking up different sakes. And then actually, I didn't mention this, I'll say this too, like for warmer sakes, if you are into warm sakes and you want to explore that further, my kind of recommendation is to look for something that is a little bit on the sweeter side and a little bit on the richer side. So I didn't talk about this as much, but that's also kind of a scale that people use to describe sakes, which is like light to rich. And so you can have sakes that you'll take a sip of and they'll have wonderful flavor, but then poof, it's gone like within a second. And then you can have sakes that you'll sip and it's got viscosity and it like sits in your mouth for a while and hangs out. And so I would say that like if you're looking for a warmer sake, usually it's slightly sweeter and slightly richer, will do you well because it just withstands the heat. Some of the more delicate sakes, like our Serenity Now, kind of has like these lighter flavors. It has more fruit. When you heat it, it kind of, the alcohol volatilizes a bit and kind of knocks out some of those more delicate flavors. And so if you're warming, it kind of like look for something a little richer that can kind of hang out and like stand up to, you know, the heat itself. And the other thing I think is just really fun to talk about and to play with is food. You know, obviously with wine, people talk about pairing all the time. And I would say that there are, you know, almost unlimited opportunities to explore sake and food. Sake has a really great way of attaching itself to food for a few different reasons. But, you know, like obviously sushi is a big win. Like it's always great to pair sake with sushi. But, you know, outside of Japanese cuisine, there's a lot of fun things that you can play with. Like we've done pretty outrageous things here, like having a cheese and sake night, which a lot of people are like, whoa, but it was so delicious. And it brought such a level of character to both the cheese and the sake. And then, you know, we did a chocolate pairing with Gerhardt's, which was really fun. But yeah, like you gotta like think outside of the box a little bit. And like, I like to say things like, you know, our Big Baby, which is like, got a really bold flavor to it. It's got some texture to it. Like I like to eat this with like pepperoni pizza. I think like the acidity content that it has kind of can hang out with those levels of kind of big bold flavors. Like our Quiet Giant with like Indian food, like, oh my gosh, it's awesome. So there's a lot of opportunity. And I think that there are things that are just inherently a little bit different about sake that lend itself to food. The acid content isn't quite as high as most wines in general. So it's just really pleasant and favorable for, you know, sipping and drinking, and then also adds a little bit to the food experience. There's also like this little thing that like the enzyme character of the koji actually also aids in helping to cut into food in a really unique way. And so, you know, it just kind of bites into it, helps break things down in a really nice way in your mouth. And so I think in general, sake is just so much fun. And I would say that I forgot to say this about koji, which I think koji is its own kind of world in and of itself. You know, koji is not only used for sake. So koji is a real staple in Japanese cuisine, and you've all had koji before outside of sake. You know, koji is essential for misos. It's essential for soy sauce or shoyus. It's essential for you know, a lot of other kind of Japanese cuisine, and really umami. I think a lot of people would agree like that koji is key to like this word umami. So koji itself is something really fun to kind of look into. But yeah, like those kind of deep, rich, savory flavors you'll get from misos and soy sauce, koji.
Can you explain what umami means?
Yeah, umami is kind of like it's kind of like the fifth taste. You know, you got sweet, you got bitter. What is it? Sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami. And umami is kind of like the savory character to it. It's hard to explain, but yeah, it's like this like mix of savory and earthy and unctuous kind of taste, and like deep. I'd maybe say it's a tough one to explain, but you'll know it when you taste it.
I have a question for you about let's talk about your branding and your Big Baby and the, you know, courage and sense of humor and the way that you've come up with names and the way that you brand your products is, I mean, not like any other sake in the world. And can you talk a little, I know you said how Serenity Now you came up with that, but
Yeah.
what's the process in deciding what you're going to call something? And the artwork on these is really remarkable, and how, you want people to smile when they see this, and
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
like other sakis. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about our different brands and our different products. And to me, it kind of comes down to a few things, which is, like we're we're just trying to have fun making sake, and so it kind of is an embodiment of what we do here. And so we want to have kind of, different products that reflect who we are. And then they also reflect, I think, the different character of each sake. So, for example, our Big Baby, we call it Big Baby for a few reasons. The first is, which I didn't really get into, is that usually when we press our Big Baby, when we press our sake, it comes out in a cloudy manner. And so we will take this and we will bottle it almost immediately within a day or two. And then we'll let it further clarify to make real magic. And so Big Baby is really one of the first things that comes. It's like the first moment of sake for us. And so it's a baby. It's my baby. And then it's got big flavor. It's got big character. It's got all kinds of things going on. It's loud. And so that it just kind of made sense to make a name like Big Baby. And I don't know where this one came from, but when Big Baby kind of happened, it was like, oh yeah, that's and then like things like Real Magic too, like the name, it just, to me, that's what it is in a lot of ways. Like it's like my first kind of moment with sake when I kind of saw what was happening and I saw the result, and I was like, this is unlike anything I've ever seen before. This is magic. Like this is, the rice and the koji and the aromas and the taste. It was just so, revelatory. And so Real Magic to me is kind of that moment of like, wow, this is unlike anything else. Quiet Giant, like that one's just in that it's 18%, but it's super smooth. And so we kind of laugh and say, like, don't let the Quiet Giant sneak up on you, because if you're not careful, this can take you out for the count. And then, yeah, we actually had the pleasure of working with a local artist. His name is Chris Danger. He was local at the time. He lives in Richmond now, to kind of help illustrate some of these. And so we just kind of, I think it's just that combo of things that we have fun with what we're doing. Like I love making sake, and then I love kind of having fun and coming up with funny names and cool illustrations that kind of go along with it. So it's who we are.
Andrew, do you all do tours?
We do, yeah. So we offer tours, pretty much not a super rigid schedule or anything, but if you come in and say, hey, I'd like a tour, you can usually get one, depending on how busy we are. And so yeah, we do tours all the time, and I think it's just an important part of what we do, because I think most people aren't super well versed in sake, and to be able to see how it's made and to see how much effort goes into it, and to see all the different processes and to see how handcrafted it is, helps give them appreciation. And then hopefully they can come back to it again and be like, okay, I kind of understand what's going on a little bit more. I think and I was guilty of this, like before I went to Japan, like I'd only really had just like cheap super hot sake at a at a sushi spot, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. But I never thought about it like I think about craft beer, or I think about like cider or whiskey or wine. And so once that kind of switched in my mind, and I kind of realized, oh, this is like a craft product, and like there's a lot of effort that goes into it. Each brewery has a personality and has, all these things. So I think that's a lot of what we try to do here, is like help you realize like a little bit more about what sake is and all that goes into it. So yeah, we do tours. Come see me. We'll do a tour.
Hey,
Which
what
one's your
kind of
favorite?
feedback did you get at the Japanese embassy?
Oh, fantastic. So yeah, we poured our sake at the Japanese embassy. This was in 2019, before the pandemic. And it was fantastic. It was one of those things. It was at this a gala for the Japanese American Society, and the ambassador to America from Japan was there and giving his keynote. And he opened it up with everyone got a pour of our sake, and he did a kanpai and kind of said a few words. And really was really an amazing moment for me personally when he lifted his glass and it's like things, like this sake is a really amazing symbol of the friendship between the Japanese and the Americans. And, me being the brewer, I'm obviously sweating. I'm kind of like looking around, but what's really great, so in Japanese, the word for delicious is oishi. I'm kind of like looking around and see a few people, oishi, oishi, oishi. So we got really good response, which is just great. And then I heard a question. It said, I think you said, which one's my favorite? And I can't answer that. They're like my children. They are all my favorite, and they're all my favorite at different times and for different reasons. I think that's also part of it is like, again, like sometimes you're in the mood for a stout and sometimes you're in the mood for an IPA. And I just think they all have interesting character that sometimes I'm really in the mood for it and sometimes not so much. And, I think what's interesting is as we've kind of refined things, our real magic is something that I'm really proud of. But it's also like in the world of sake, like the junmais are, like I said, they're kind of like table sakes. They're easy drinking. They kind of are more robust. They're not like super light and delicate or super sweet. They're kind of like right in the middle. So they're not like highly acclaimed. But I think a lot of sake breweries take a lot of pride in making a really good junmai because it kind of shows a lot of skill in a lot of ways. And so I think that in general, like, I'm really excited to keep working on that, potentially for the rest of my life. Like that's kind of a cool little thing that I'll be doing. So I'm ready for that.
Andrew, I have one question.
Sure.
You mentioned the word refinement. What type of refinement do you do? This is a process. And once you do your process, you got your process, you continue with it. So what kind of refinement are you referring to? I'd be interested in hearing that.
Yeah. So, there's so much. There's so much. And I think that's what's really incredible about this is that it's such a simple beverage, right? It's rice. But there are endless nuance in almost every step of the process. And there's a lot of steps. And so whether it's, the type of rice that we're using, the mill rates or the yeast, those are kind of big picture kind of things. But things like how long I wash the rice for, how long I steam the rice for, how I make my koji, whether that's the amount of time I spend, how often I attend to it, temperatures in the room, humidities in the room. And it's like a living organism. So every time it's a little different. And so, it's tweaking those things. And then in the fermentation process, the temperature ranges, every time it's different. And so there are just endless little things to do to sway flavor and to improve upon your process. So it's like one of those things like, yeah, one of our processes is to steam rice, but how you do that, you can do a million different ways. And so we're constantly kind of tweaking and playing.
Well, one thing is what consumers buy is consistency. So how do you maintain that consistency, or do you want to maintain that consistency in the first batch to the second batch, or from one, from one real magic to Serenity Now. It seems like you're talking about, every batch or every brand is maybe different.
Yeah, no, it's true. And you're right. But it's a hard thing with sake to maintain consistency. It shows a lot of skill. And I think that we are in a very early stage of our brewery where we're still pushing a lot of things to get better. But there's also, I think, consistent lines that run through our different sakes that do maintain a level of consistency. So, because it's one of those things that, like, you think about a grain of rice, and because the grain of rice kind of moves all the way through this process, the slight differences in each grain of rice, when you multiply that out by millions of grains, like it's always a new adventure. And so it's both things where you're trying to pull it towards where you want it to be, at the same time, you're pulling it towards where you want it to be, knowing that it kind of came from a different, maybe, starting point. So yeah, I think it's a tough thing. A lot of times people in the sake world kind of talk about this word, it's called intent. And so with sake, compared to a lot of other alcohols or a lot of other things in general, it's like there are ingredients and then there is a recipe. And when you do follow the instructions, you should get to the final product. But that's not really how it works with sake. You've got these living organisms, you've got fermentation, you've got natural differences in all these things. And so, this word intent is really important because you have a vision for what you intend the sake to be. But all these little steps you do along the way start to kind of move it. And, being a good sake brewer, which is something I hope I am, is to help kind of slowly move things in a certain direction. And yes, I think our Real Magic now is definitely different than the Real Magic we had when we first started, but it has key characteristics that remain the same. And so I think the kind of slight improvements we do will hopefully blossom that versus changing it, let's say.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Each batch is not a McDonald's, it's not a McDonald's, it's not a McDonald's.
Definitely not a McDonald's. But I like that. That's a good way of putting it.
Well, one thing I would like to just say thank you to Andrew for spending this time with us tonight. And, Andrew's a relatively new member of the chamber. And the thing that has really just amazed me through the past couple of years is when you think about this, there's only what you said, like a dozen sake breweries in the country or something close to that. And he launched this brand new thing, almost immediately before COVID. So you've been open for, maybe a year before COVID started, or maybe just a little longer. But the fact that you've been able to not only maintain, but grow and change and add new products and build this reputation that's, obviously growing well beyond this area, I think is amazing. And I think it's really reflective of the Charlottesville business community that we're all here to support each other. And so I think it's great that you all came here. And I'm not like doing a closing statement. I just wanted to say I'm really moved by what you're doing, and I just wanted to salute you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's been a wild time, as I think a lot of you know. And I think that it's been trying and it's been scary and it's been all these things. But I think for me, like personally, it was like I love what I do. Like I love this business. I love making sake. I like drinking sake a lot. And it's just kind of been like I want to keep pushing because this is what I want to do. And so, I think COVID's been tough. And we've gone through the ringer, but we kind of have to keep pushing because I want to keep making sake. So, bring these challenges on. Let's do it.
Andrew, want to say that, well, I want to thank you, but when we do it, when we start in person, maybe we can have a chamber network program at the sake place.
I love that. I think it'd be fantastic. You know, yeah. I mean, I think once things get, you know, people get more comfortable, I'm happy to host. I'd love to. And we have a nice outdoor patio, so you know, we have open air spot to hang out.
Well, Melvin is an esteemed member of the board of directors, so between him and me, I think we can make that happen. But Rhiannon and Scott, you are our leaders of this group, and if you have any last moments or thoughts, I know we wanted to get a photo. So Scott,
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
yes, let me.
Yeah, can we stop sharing and then
yes,
make sure we get a good photo?
We need
Yeah.
a group photo. We need a lot of compis.
Yeah, look, do a good compi, everyone. All right.
All right, hang on here.
I need to fill this up.
Pressure's on. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Kampai.
Kampai.
Excellent. All right, I got it.
I gotta change my background. Hold up.
Works.
We've got Photoshop for that.
No, wait a minute, no. Hold up.
So does everyone want to share what their favorite was? Mine was the big baby. I like the Nagori, the unfiltered ones.
Oh, you are a big baby.
I am. I can be.
Yes.
If I wanna.
That was
I
probably
think I
my
like the
favorite too.
Serenity Now.
Mm,
My favorite.
it's got good taste.
Please take a shot now.
Oh, here we go. All right, got it. There are some that are only available in your brewery too, right?
Yes. So this flight in general was a more traditional kind of experience to kind of really dive into sake. We also do a number of experimental and infused styles of sake. So, you know, think things like we have a sparkling sake right here on right now on tap. It's really delicious with bubbles, and then we do things like dry hopping sakes. We do fruit and herb infusion, so like lemon and mint, or our kind of fruit punch. That are usually a little bit lower ABV and just easy to drink. So it's just kind of like one of those things, like we have a little bit of everything for all kinds of tastes. You know, for
Now, one last question.
Yep.
I bought a bottle of sake from you about a year ago, and I've had it in my fridge. Can I still open that up and drink it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. That if you've kept it in the fridge, especially, it's just fine. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
It's been aged well.
It has been.
Rhiannon, Scott, any further thoughts for the group, or are we a wrap till the next meeting?
I think we're a wrap. Andrew, thank you so much for your time this evening and walking us through everything.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
hopefully we can all meet in person soon. So come back.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining. I had a blast. I don't know about y'all, but I had a great time. I didn't know a lot about sake. I knew I like to drink it, but I didn't know a lot of the information how it's made. So this was super informative.
Great.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.